Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Classical Academy podcast, your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Phillips. And before we get started, I want to remind you once again, as I always do, if you are enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, give us a review, and most important, share this podcast with friends, with family, with anyone who might want to learn more about classical Christian education. It is indeed the hope, the educational hope of the Western world. In Jeremiah 33:25, God mentions his fixed laws that govern heaven and earth. That's one of the passages that actually drove early scientists, the European Christians, to observe God's creation and create modern science. 17th century German astronomer, mathematician, and philosopher Johannes Kepler, he contributed greatly as one of the fathers of modern astronomy, and he helped solidify the scientific method. And he said this: "The chief aim of all investigations of the external world should be to discover the rational order and harmony which has been imposed on it by God and which he revealed to us in the language of mathematics." So if mathematics is this wonderful language of God, what's the best way to learn how to speak it, how to understand this majestic and enchanting world, this language of mathematics? My guest today will help us answer these questions. It's Sarah Hwang, and as we discuss Singapore mathematics taught here at Trinity. Sarah has been teaching at the grammar school at Trinity since the fall of 2021, and actually teaching has been a passion of hers since she was in elementary school herself. Fun fact about Sarah: she's born in Corpus Christi, which is where my parents were married, Corpus Christi, Texas, the Body of Christ, Texas. She loves crafting, usually with paper and drawing utensils, working out with friends, and hiking in nature that has lots of trees for shade. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips.
Very excited to have you here. Now, before we get started, what does working out with friends look like? I think a lot of people in January are very curious because that's when a lot of people start those workout sessions.
Very true. My husband had introduced me to CrossFit back in 2012.
Yeah.
And after a few years, COVID had hit. Many years, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, my husband had decided to invest in a few gym equipment so that we could continue to weightlift and work out in a garage. And so thankfully, I have a few friends who come over on Saturdays to work out with me. So
fun.
We'll get our heart racing.
There you go. That's a good Saturday night.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, very good. Okay, Singapore math. Now, we're going to discuss it, talk about it, but before we do, just briefly, why Singapore math? Why do we teach Singapore math at Trinity?
So from my understanding, when math was first brought into Trinity, the curriculum developer had landed on Saxon math, which is fantastic for helping students to memorize a lot of basic math facts. Memorization is great. However, it also limits student understanding and the flexibility to be able to play with numbers and to enjoy numbers and to see numbers from a mathematical reasoning standpoint. And so Singapore math was brought in to help to intentionally teach math in a very systematic way so that those who are learning the math can have a more fluid understanding of numbers, to be able to see pattern in numbers and also to be able to explain how and why they came up with the solution that they did.
Fantastic. Sounds like the language of God indeed. So I think everybody has an idea of where it came from. But what we know it comes from Singapore, but a little more details about that, if you would, please.
Sure thing. Back in the mid-60s to late 70s, Singapore had their own Department of Education, very similar to our Department of Education. And they were importing math curriculum from international countries. And so they decided to kind of take a study at how their students were learning math, and they wanted to do something better for their students. And so they had a curriculum development institute of Singapore who looked into how can we create a textbook curriculum that would help our students to not just to be good at math, but to be very fluid in their mathematic understanding, to be able to reason well, to be able to problem solve well. And that's how Singapore math was born.
Okay. So now let's get down to it. I know there's like 3 key terms: concrete, pictorial, abstract. So I'm going to ask you kind of include those as you give us an overview of a Singapore math program.
Sure. And I would say these 3 are a lot easier to see in our elementary school or grammar school programs. So concrete would be you're able to touch and feel and manipulate the objects. So for example, maybe you have actual cubes, or maybe you have even fruit. Maybe you have little erasers. But they are things or objects that students would be able to touch to be able to move around. And from there, you would be able to draw or to have 2D images that would represent that concrete idea that we are working with. So for example, let's say we are dealing with the number 3. We know how to write the number 3, right? And we will usually associate the number 3 as, well, 3 is 3. However, that understanding of the number 3, the symbol of number 3, starts even with having 3 separate objects, right? So being able to touch, for example, kindergartners, to be able to touch 3 objects, that would be their concrete manipulative understanding of 3.
Fabulous.
Now, 3, we would say, oh, well, that math understanding can stop there. But 3 can also be nothing and 3. It can be 3 separate things. It can be 2 and 1, right? So 3 doesn't just stop there, but to have the ability to compose the number 3, but also to decompose or to separate into other smaller numbers. We're helping students to have the fluidity with numbers in that way. Pictorial, as I had mentioned, would be like a drawing, right? You could have 3 boxes that would represent the 3 manipulatives that the student played with. And then moving into abstract, helping students to associate, well, this is the concrete version, the picture version. Now we represent the number 3 with this particular symbol. And so that can be, you know, as you had mentioned earlier, mathematics is actually a language in which we speak, and there's so much vocabulary, language, and understanding that goes into helping us to build up our understanding of math.
So there's like a lot of problem solving, and how does that interrelate with this idea of drawing, problem solving and drawing? Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Sure. For example, let's say we have a simple equation, addition equation.
Okay.
23 plus 35, right? The number 23. Now, the wonderful thing about being able to reason is you have one correct answer, but you can get to the correct answer in multiple different ways. 23 plus... What number did I just
I think
say?
you did 35. I think it was 23
I should write that down.
Sure.
So let's say we have 23 plus 35.
Sure.
We could easily add, well, we have 3 ones, 5 ones. We'll add that up together. And we have 8 ones. You have 2 tens, 3 tens. We have 5 tens.
5 tens.
Another way of approaching it, maybe you could count up, right? From 23, count up 35, and then you also get to the same answer. Or perhaps you would group 23 into a picture, and then you would still be, so 23, in my class, we call it quick draw. So we would have representations of the number. Instead of drawing 23 individual dots, we would have it represented, a bundle of 10 would be represented as a stick. And then you would have the ones represented as dots. And so you would have a visual representation of the tens and the ones, which would help to lead to the symbolic answer.
So you'd have like 2 sticks, 3 dots for 23,
Yeah.
and 3 sticks, 5 dots for 35.
Yes.
Wow. This sounds fun. Really?
It is.
I hope somebody does an experiment sometime where they're monitoring portions of the brain and seeing which ones light up as you're doing the different methodologies. All you
Yeah.
neuroscientists out there, let's go. Let's make that happen. Well, that really is wonderful. What are some of the goals that you set? I mean, how does goal setting fit into Singapore math?
That is a great question. I think it depends on the concept that is being taught.
Mm-hmm. Right?
At the younger age, we would definitely want a mastery of understanding what each of the numbers are.
Uh-huh.
By
Right.
the time that we are able to reach first and second grade and we're able to work with addition and subtraction, we want students to not just to be able to come up with the correct answer, but also to reason and to explain how they got the answer that they did.
Right.
And so our
Fabulous.
goal in Singapore math is that not only do they, like I said, come up with the correct answer, but they're also able to explain, well, logically, this is why this is the correct answer.
Spectacular. That is so wonderful. So we certainly have core values in Christianity, and we apply those in classical Christian education. How would you say Singapore math fits with the values and the practices of classical Christian education?
So the great thing about Singapore math is that we're helping students to be able to uncover and to find that one truth. The truth and the correct answer is not going to change just because we feel like it. 2 plus 2 isn't going to equal 6 because one day I just felt like it, right? And so truth will remain as truth, and we are helping students. Yes, even though there's one truth, you can still get to that same truth, but in multiple different ways. Also, I know that Singapore math can be hard. It can be very frustrating. It involves a lot of critical thinking and problem solving, and I've had a lot of students, even in my own class, when they come across word problems where they want to get the answer right away, but they know they have to sit with the question and to really figure out, what is this question asking me? What do I know? What tools do I have to help me to get to the answer? So really, Singapore math is helping to train our students to persevere through the challenges. That sometimes truth is not going to come right away. You have to be uncomfortable, and that's where growth happens.
I think that's so important for students and especially with young students, especially parents alike, that they understand, sure, it may not be the way you learned math. There may be some added steps or added perspectives, but you're talking about all the values that come with that. This is much more than just 2 plus 2 is 4. This is really going into the philosophical theology of Christianity, it sounds like.
Right. And one of the great things about learning is that we can learn the same thing, but in multiple different ways, right? There have been studies that show that students who know more than one language, they get to code the same piece of information in multiple languages.
Sure.
Therefore, they have access to that same information, but through a different way. I kind of liken it to, well, we're here up in Valencia. We're about an hour and 10 minutes-ish away from Disneyland. And that's a
On a
very
good traffic day.
Yes, without traffic, right? But let's say one of our major freeways shut down, the 5. We're not going to all of a sudden cancel our plans because one freeway is shut down. You could take the 210 south to get to Anaheim one way. You could take the 405. So we're really helping students to build up their toolboxes. Yes, it will take longer. Sometimes we're giving them other ways to get to a certain answer. But if they have a roadblock, let's say, to get to a certain answer, well, at least they have 2 or 3 other options that they can utilize to be able to get to that same answer.
Yes. If you pull a cooking masterpiece out of the oven too soon, folks, it's not worthy of eating. And I think Singapore math really teaches us that. So how do you see it? It sort of touched on it a little bit, but how do you see it affecting what the students think about, what they care about? How how does it challenge them? I think you've talked about that a bit, but a little more detail on the effect you see Singapore math having on them. I think that will really encourage and enlighten people about using Singapore math in classical Christian education.
Right. We talk about how it helps to give tools to students to see and to wonder about the world about them, that they don't see the number 20 as just 20, but they could see as 10 groups of 2 or 5 groups of 4. It also helps them to explore, once again, the composition or the decomposition of numbers. You could break apart or build numbers using smaller numbers. Students can also play around with the fluidity of numbers. I had an example of where I had a student, we were talking about graphs, and we had taken a poll as to how many students like this particular ice cream flavor. And we had 4 different choices. And the students, I had, one picture for each student who voted for a certain flavor. And initially they were counting with me one by one. And then they just got tired of counting one by one, started skip counting 2, 4, 6, 8. So
sure.
it's fun being able to see them like, oh, look at you. See, you're looking for shortcuts. You use what you knew to help you to get to a certain number faster or whatnot. So it doesn't have to be stuck in just one particular lesson, but it's just really fun to see students explore like, oh, yeah, I can use this particular math concept in a different way. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I'm a parent with a student. What might be some questions that I should ask my student about the math? Something that might be helpful or enlightening even to me as a parent.
That is great. Yes, especially if you see that your child is struggling with a certain problem. Some questions that you can ask them is, well, what do you know? Based on the information that is given, what do you know so far? You can also help them to draw it out or even act it out, right? A lot of times, like I said, one of the most challenging things that we have seen in Singapore math is word problems and working through word problems. And a lot of times students will get frustrated because now you have to decipher and code out what are these words trying to tell me? What is the question that is being asked? Another great question to ask your child would be, can you explain how you came to this solution? Or if they are really great at math, can you think of another way that we could get to this solution?
Sure.
That way we're really helping them to challenge to think outside of, well, yes, you might know it one way, but maybe there are other ways that we can explore to be able to get to that same answer.
It sounds so much like the journey of Christianity rather than just, oh, I just want the right answer. No, the journey is the beauty of what you seem to be talking about here. So I think Johannes Kepler's right. God has imposed on the world this order, reveals it to us in the language of mathematics. We've mathematized so many fundamental constants and things we observe and learn, the physical constants. So this is a beautiful language that he has spoken to us. How can I, as a parent, help my student to love math? Because it will certainly be loving God and loving this language he's given us.
Absolutely. I always encourage my parents, math does not have to look like a worksheet. You can find math in and through games that you play. Perhaps it's the monotonous task of counting.
Sure.
I make my kids help me with counting out counters, sometimes in groups of 5 or 10, because eventually they'll see their own patterns. Oh, 3 and 7 will make 10. That's a group of 10. Oh, 5 and 5 is going to make 10. There's another group. 1 and 9. 10.
Wow.
So that's also
Yes.
a great way to play around with numbers. Look for patterns, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be numbers per se, but perhaps there's geometrical patterns that you may see, maybe the way that lines fall or rise. You can also see math when you're bored and you're looking up at the ceiling. Is there a particular reason why the architect or whoever designed certain art pieces have decided that there are certain patterns that are more pleasing to the eyes than others, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be an equation and you look for a solution, but math can math is, like you said, it's fun. You
Yes.
can explore it and find it in anything and everything all around us. And it doesn't have to be necessarily assigned, but it can be found in moments when maybe we're bored and it just comes to us.
How wonderful. Well, how encouraging it is to hear someone like you who loves math, who loves the kids, and loves helping the kids learn to love math, this beautiful language of God. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. It's very encouraging to hear this, and I know it's encouraging for the parents who know sometimes their students may struggle a little extra hard, but oh boy, how much it is worth it, and what a blessing you are to them, and we thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to all of you out there for joining us on the Classical Academy podcast. It's presented by Trinity U, a service of Trinity Classical Academy right here in Santa Clarita, California. Our producer is Shay Ramquist. Stephen Petrie is our audio engineer and provides our original music that you hear right now. So until next time, let's all continue to grow in wisdom, in virtue, and in the love of God, including the love of his language, mathematics. Till next time.